2 months ago, Cathie Wood announced on a Friday night that the bull market had begun. And the next morning on this show, I announced that the bull market, based on Cathie's statement, had begun. Not because I'm a genius, but because I'm genius enough to know when Cathie's being a genius. So now I bring Larry Goldberg on to even add to the genius of this morning's show. Larry, glad to have you on.
Thanks, Randy. Great to be here with you.
So you guys know what to do. If you like having Larry on, hit the like button and hit subscribe and notify and all that jazz. And then follow Larry at Tesla Larry on Twitter. And so what we do, for those of you who are new to this show, on the Saturday morning after the Friday night that Cathie comes out with her report. Now, Cathie Wood is the head, the CEO of ARK Invest and all of the ARK funds. And she specializes in these breakthrough companies that are basically disrupting the economy. That she has a 5-year outlook, and she's also got, I don't know, almost as much experience as Larry and I. She's not quite as old, but she's getting there in terms of.
She's not as old, perhaps, but maybe a little bit brighter.
Well, I don't know. Brighter might be the right word. I was thinking also her specific experience in terms of the market itself and really working on the economy and what makes the economy tick. That would certainly be far deeper and broader than either of us. However, I think that we bring unique experience. Larry owned a software company, among others. I owned a manufacturing business, among others. And so we are boots on the ground kind of guys. Who have dealt internationally, Larry with companies in India and in South Africa.
South Africa, UK, US.
Yeah, so that's what we bring to the table, as well as both of us having played the market for many, many years. Anyway, so Larry, I think the main takeaway I got from yesterday's night's Cathie Wood expose was that she agrees we're in a Goldilocks situation in the economy. I've been saying that for a couple of weeks. I was not the first to say it by a lot, but I do believe we are in a Goldilocks situation. What say you?
I think, Cathie, last time we spoke, we summarized Cathie's talk. I said, my fear is that the Fed wouldn't declare victory and accept that they had achieved this, soft landing, and they would take matters further. And they did. I mean, they just upped the interest rate yet again. I think that Cathie really is saying the same thing. I think she's saying that, things may have gone too far, and, they really need to stop. They should have stopped a little bit earlier. She's saying that some signs are not that good. There are definitely indications that we've gone a little bit far. And indeed, she mentioned that Powell even mentioned the word restrictive in his presentation to Congress. And she really said that she hoped that really reflects the fact that they're now ready to start backing off. Because as we said the last time we summarized this, it looked like they had achieved their goal and that maybe they're going a little bit further. And this could really, if they went further, this could tip us into a recession. And I think Cathie's indicating that there is significant risk of that. There is indications that interest rates are continuing to climb. There are monetary supplies getting more and more restrictive, and that typically this is this overhang occurs before you actually measure the result of that overhang. And so I think she's indicating real concern. She thinks there are going to be revisions down in the next 6 months, that even though employment is showing significant growth, that actually it's hiding, some potential downward revisions, and indicating that manufacturers or employers are kind of hoarding labor, I think is the word she used. And that hoarding of labor is because of their experiences of coming out of the pandemic and, not having any labor. There's this constant overshooting, that our behavior is always reacting to what happened rather than what's going to happen in the marketplace. And she has real concerns that when the hoarding ends, there'll be an abrupt drop in employment, and she's already seeing signs of concern. So
she emphasizes monetary policy. This is one of the areas where she's very strong, and she has very strong opinions on money supply, etc. We do know that the money supply is now back around to where it was pre-COVID. It is not necessarily negative at this point, although it's been dropping. So it's not like there isn't enough money in the system, but if it continued to drop, we could get into some serious problems in terms of just overall money in the system. She mentioned, as you did, but I wanted to make a greater point of it, that sometimes these these money supply drops take 12 to 18 months before they really have impact. And that 12 to 18 month period might be second quarter next year before we would really see the impact of the money supply dropping.
Right. And actually, the money supply is already showing a downward trend, a very significant downward trend. And so, this last cut, I think, was ill-advised. Right. And I think she's saying the same thing. I don't think she actually said that, but I think she's implying that. So I think, she's pleased to see inflation coming down, but I think there's a significant risk, and she points to that, that we're going to see a sudden drop in employment figures, and we're going to see, significant risk to the economy in 6 months' time. Early next year is what she's talking about. So
now I'll put my optimist version on this, and it is because I've heard some things out there. Okay, again, because I'm still involved in the economy, I'm still talking to business owners, I'm still talking to people that are having to deal, on a day-to-day basis. And what I'm hearing is there's still not enough employees. You still can't get good help. And companies that are actually short of employees are still finding it almost easier than it was a year ago. Because last year it was like impossible. You actually had people out in front of retail stores spinning signs that said, "We need help." But you're still seeing the help wanted signs in retail and in fast food and whatnot. And I'm talking to owners who are saying it's still extremely hard to get any kind of help right now.
But, there are some leading indicators that point to a downturn. So she talks about Robert Half, who hire, higher end type employees. They're showing a downward trend, and that's kind of a leading indicator. Even manpower, which is down market, in terms of the labor market, is, softening. So job openings are falling. And there have been job losses in tech. So Silicon Valley is thinning down in prep for the AI revolution. So, you're always the glass half full guy, half full. I'm always the glass half empty guy. So I think that indicates this balance, this delicate balance that we're in. But Cathie's point is that, the economy always shows up the policy 6 months to a year later. And so that's really the risk that, that's the primary risk. And so we have to be cautious. The real GDP is, going up like this, but the question is, what's happening in the real economy now, and what is it pointing to in the future? She talked about Costco, the sort of evidence in Costco to see what people are buying, and people are cutting back quite significantly. They were previously changing down market brands. Now they're actually reducing their actual purchases, and so she's a little bit concerned about that. And I know you feel that we're still on the up and up, but I have the same concern as she does.
Yes, and I think one of the points that part of her conversation was making was not only are people cutting back and potentially drawing out of their freezers as opposed to keeping their freezers as chock full, but she also made the point that this individual she talked to said that at Costco, we already see deflation on the Costco shelf. This may not be in Kroger, it may not be in Ralph's, but at least at Costco, this individual said, and he's in there all the time, and he was a high-level C-suite guy, said he's seeing deflation actually taking place already at grocery.
Yeah.
Not just disinflation. Okay, so another thing that I saw last week that pumped up my optimistic spirit was a headline that suggested that this recession has been so long in developing that companies are prepared. And so having written that book on recession, and now that's been several years ago that I wrote the book, but in the book on recessions that I wrote, I gave a list of ways that people need to prepare for a recession. And the number one way is to be cash rich. You need to have cash in the bank. You need to be on top of your receivables. You need to make sure that you've got your lending lines and your accounts payable lines in place so that no matter what takes place, you've got plenty of liquidity. And the suggestion of this article was this recession has been so long coming that companies have been putting themselves in a place where they're prepared. What do you think about that theory? What do you think about that theory?
I agree with that. By and large, by the way, profits have held up. I mean, the earnings calls have been relatively good, better than expected, actually. And by and large, people are in fairly good financial condition, except possibly for the banks, which is quite serious. But, equity markets, Cathie says, are buying into a lower inflation, particularly since Powell used the word restrictive. That indicates that, that they think they're done. But, Cathie doesn't think it's going to be a soft landing. She thinks this 18-month lag is going to hit unexpectedly. And she says that fixed income markets is moving up in response to, real GDP, and less to lower than expected inflation. So, the interest rate inversion is narrowing, which is really quite a good sign, and there's still not margin pressures, but she thinks that that's coming, so she's not as bullish as you are.
No, that's a fact. she's a good hedger. She's always got 2 or 3 reasons why it could really go south in a hurry.
Right.
I was a little shocked by her margin comment, though. I don't always agree with Cathie, by the way, and that was the one that I agreed with her the least on. I have spent my entire career dealing with international trade and with buying and selling commodities, and buying and selling retail, and margins. She was saying maybe companies would allow some margin compression rather than raising their prices. I don't think anybody's going to be raising prices right now. I think they might be lowering prices due to what do you want to call it? Competition. The competition lowers the price. You got to lower the price. But allowing compression would suggest that they don't have any levers to pull with regard to lowering costs. And that was so not Cathie Wood, because she's always talking about the benefits of productivity gains. And we just saw the productivity report come out last week that was like all rosy, jumping from a negative 0.8 or something to a positive 2 something in one quarter. that productivity gain to me was the biggest news of the entire week.
Right, but I think what she's looking at is like 18 months down the road.
I see.
So what we're seeing now, there are multiple different signals in the market,
Sure.
and it's hard to sort them out. But what the government has done, what Powell has done in the last 6 months, 8 months, are only going to really impact us 12 months, 18 months down the road.
Right.
And so I think that we haven't seen that story play out yet.
Okay.
And I'm concerned about it.
So,
and I think that's what she's saying.
Yeah. So one of the other things that she remarked on was about the bank report from the Fed, which I think almost nobody pays any attention to.
Right.
This is a roughly quarterly, sometimes more, sometimes less than quarterly report that said that when Powell used the word restrictive, this report was saying that the banks are much more restrictive right now than they were a year ago. And that they're expecting to be somewhat more restrictive going forward, a little bit lighter than what they said the last report. But this is a survey of bank executives, and they're saying basically, we don't have the capital anyway. We can't raise capital. We're unable to get more money coming into our cash accounts, the checking and savings accounts. So it's not like we have a lot of money sitting around to lend. And then if we do want to lend, we're kind of nervous right now about lending. And so we're being more restrictive in terms of who we do lend to. So that would be the thing that I, as a guy who owned businesses and have borrowed money from banks a great deal of the time, that would be the thing I would be most concerned about. What do you think?
Look, I'm very concerned about it. Credit is really the oil, the lubrication in the system. And the banks really, we're at a point now where we really don't only have a handful of banks that are truly lending money. And they happen to be the banks that most small businesses can't bank with. You take the top 3 banks in the country, and how many small businesses, are banking with them. So, that's a real problem. I think our banking system has just really imploded. And I think that the fault lies in this idea of these, having these 4 or 5 banks that are identified as,
big banks,
systematically important, and all the rest don't count.
They even call them other. That's the name they use. That's the technical word for them. Other.
And now these guys who are the other actually have no money to lend at all, because interest rates are so high that people are just putting their money into these money market funds, and so businesses that need money can't get it. So what's going to happen? We've lost a banking system. We've actually, since 2008, we have completely decimated the banking system. Something has to change. Yeah. And, before the Federal Reserve existed, and Cathie spoke about this, she said that, she learned from Art Laffer that there were many, really bad moments of banking crises, but they only lasted a couple of weeks at a time. And I read the JP Morgan story.
I was actually there. No kidding.
Yeah. But and JP, I remember in the 20 crisis, in the 1920 crash, the story about JP Morgan getting all the bankers together and deciding who was going to live and who was going to die in that beautiful study of his in downtown New York. You can go and visit it. His mansion is still open. His library is still open, and it's really a fantastic place. But it's true, they were very brief crises. They came they wiped out all the ones who couldn't survive, and then, everybody moved on. But today our crises last years at a time. And we're constantly in this crisis because we've got this massive government spending. We've got this Reserve Bank that's built this gigantic portfolio of debt. I don't know how they'll ever sell it, how they'll ever get rid of it. And so this is what, having this Federal Reserve Bank has led us to, and what having this free spending money, government has brought us to. And so I think at a point in time, this may lead to a very serious crisis. She didn't say that,
yes,
but that's kind of how I feel from what I'm seeing.
So if we go back, I think one of the big issues, I mean, there's really two issues that the Fed keeps talking about. One of those is labor, and one of those is housing.
Right.
So let's look at labor first. And Cathie mentioned about hoarding labor. So I wanted to really think that through, and I think it's happening, by the way. I really think that companies, especially big companies, are hoarding labor. Small companies rarely are going to hoard labor. Now they might hoard that, they might still have one extra employee. I know I had a consultant come into my company one time, and after he looked at my company for 3 days, he says, Randy, do you like luxury? I said, what do you mean luxury? He says, you've got 3 people in your customer service department. You could easily do it with 2. You've got 2.5 artists. You could easily do it with 1.5, And so yes, companies hoard employees, but not necessarily intentionally. But if you get into a situation where you are always limited in terms of what you can do because there's nobody there, and then they quit and they're leaving like crazy, and they don't give you any notice anymore, they just walk out the door. So then there might be a tendency to keep on a couple of people that you might not otherwise keep on, that might be marginal. However, my thought process with that is, but those people are getting better. They're actually getting more productive, unless they're complete dunces. So I want to think in terms of the entire market. The individuals who might have been let go previously that are kept on, they're becoming more productive, at least to some degree. So overall, I'm not too worried about that hoarding, and I'm not sure that there's going to be this mass layoff of those hoarded employees. And finally, let me finish the concept is, I think they'll have jobs if they leave, because now they've moved up in class enough to where they can probably move laterally or even up if they were let go.
Well, the glass half empty guy would say to that, if the current interest rate increases, if the Reserve Bank's constant raising of the Reserve Bank, if it takes 1.5 years to work through, then that tail is still to come. And so if that tail hits, then this, fantastic job market where everybody can get a job if they want a job, that could suddenly, disappear. And then those people who are redundant, or who are, a little bit too, they are going to be struggling. Look, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, you couldn't go to a restaurant because they didn't have people.
Right.
Now you can't go to a restaurant because they're all booked out.
Yeah, right.
But they have plenty of people.
Right.
They have plenty of people. Service is really good in restaurants right now, even though they're, packed to the gills. Now the question is, what happens when people really start cutting back, or do start, then, what will the impact be? You can't get a booking on an aircraft today because they're all packed. Mm-hmm. And when you actually do fly, you're, like sardines. So, and the airlines finally have got their employment levels up to the point that they wanted them at. The question is, when this particular pig gets through this particular snake, what's going to happen on the other side to these enormous, increases in staff that these airlines have put on. I think that's the concern. And if the government raises if the Federal Reserve raises the interest rates again, I'll go to the White House or go to the Federal Reserve Bank with my sign, and but it's really bad. The last increase was uncalled for. It was just, they got into the habit and they can't get out of the habit. And hopefully they'll understand that they can't continue to do this. And then they're going to have to reform the banks. They cannot continue this policy. It's crazy.
So let's switch over to housing. So I did a show the other day where I mentioned this article, read most of the article on the show. And it was almost as if the guy had taken one of my scripts and written the article from the script. And he was saying, with regard to rental housing, yes, the restrictive economy that we've got right now can affect rental, and it has. And in fact, rentals are flat. New leases are about flat right now, which is good. But when it comes to individual single-family dwellings, that the increase in the interest rates is having the opposite effect the Fed wants it to have. And I think Powell even said at one point, who's going to move out of their house when they've got a 2.5–3% loan? I believe he actually said those words a month ago. Yeah. So he gets it. He understands that the market cannot, there's not a chance in the world that we're going to be able to get the housing prices to come down, the individual, residential retail homes. That's not going to come down in price until we get more supply, and we're not going to get more supply when interest rates are this high. So it would seem like the two things that he's still the most concerned about are going to be most helped by lowering the interest rate, not by increasing it or even keeping it the same.
Yeah, I think interest rates have got to a point where, we have reached some degree of stasis in the housing market. The rental market, though, is really, going to feel it for a long time, for quite a while to come. I don't know how we get the interest rates back down, to reasonable levels, though. Is this a 70s type? Is this a 90s type? It's really hard to tell. Everybody has written off, except Cathie, written off the possibility of a recession coming. I haven't. I think we're skirting. I think we're in a rolling recession in significant components of the economy, and housing is kind of at this balance. You really drew the picture very nicely of this balance that we're in. Well, the problem with these balanced situations is that they can tip badly one way or the other, and that's really my concern. So, if only maybe the Federal Reserve had begun to realize that they've gone a little bit too far, and he used the word restrictive, not necessarily in relation to interest rates. I think he was talking more about the banks, but the fact that he used that word may indicate that he's come alive to this threat. But I see this threat all around me, and I'm really concerned about it.
So I'm wondering, what do you think the chances are that we actually go to zero on inflation, or even under? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm struggling to think about the balance that we could actually go to zero. I don't think we will, because I think labor costs are rising so rapidly now. I think that the material costs are leveling off, and they had to ultimately, and we saw that, a lot of that was just, what was coming through the pipeline, and that's ended, and some of that has stopped. All of that seems to have stopped, actually. But labor, the cost of hiring is has not yet fully been priced in, and I think that's coming. So I think the chances of actually going to zero are relatively low. I think that until we see the full impact of what the Fed has done, I think it's pretty low. And interest rates, they haven't peaked yet, so that bakes in a lot of increases. So I don't think we're going to get down to zero. I think, in fact, if anything, it may even tick up a little bit more.
Oh, I see. So of course, I've been mentioning the oil issue because I think oil is always kind of the one of the main generators because it goes throughout the economy. Oil is now sitting around 82. It was 67 just a couple of months ago, but that's primarily, I think, due to Saudi. Well, OPEC didn't exactly cut, but they said they wouldn't go any higher. And then Saudi said, well, we'll do our own cut separately from you. And then the Russians came in and said, we'll cut too. So that threw us up to this 82, but it still seems to be bound in that range of 67 to 82, where it's been for, I don't know, a year. Do you think oil will break out of that range? I mean, we're using less and less oil all the time. Or, well, maybe that's not true. But let's say we're using less oil per capita, I would say.
Yeah. I think a lot turns on the coming winter. If the winter is a mild one, then I think we will see oil level off and even drop. The other thing oil turns on is the outcome of the Ukraine war or the events of the Ukraine war. Last night, Ukraine attacked an oil tanker.
Right.
That could shut down the Black Sea oil trade for Russia. That could be pretty damn serious for Russia and could have an impact on the oil price, a negative, an upward pressure on the oil price.
Right.
So there are so many unknowns that to say, oh, I think the oil price is going to do this is kind of crazy. I think we need to be guarded about oil price in general, but not about commodities in general. So oil is in that unique position of being so impacted by this war. And the other thing we have to think about is food prices. We could see very, very significant impact on food prices because the basic raw feedstock comes from the Ukraine. Should say comes from Ukraine and Russia. Both of those supplies are going to be impacted by the war. I think the war is going to get into a really crisis mode. I mean, more of a crisis mode than it is right now.
But again, now we've had a year and a half to think that through. I mean, last year at this time, everybody was talking about the price of food stocks and the
end of the grain agreement and the destruction of the Ukraine ports and now the closing of the Black Sea, that changes the game. So don't think about our experience of last year. Think about this is a new situation. So that could be very serious to food prices. And so that could have a real big impact. By the way, it's really bullish for American farmers.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
sure. I mean, and for European farmers. So all of this, what we're just talking about now with regard to food stocks and with regard to oil and their continuing impact on world economies, all speaks extremely good news for Tesla. So last week, I thought the news was good. I thought Tesla's news was good. I thought the overall economic news was good. Everybody's talking about Goldilocks, and yet the market and Tesla got hammered last week. What do you think we're looking at coming up? I know you're not a short-term guy, but just in general, I know you think about these things.
Yeah, I don't see any impact on Tesla stock price until I said earlier this year, everything turns on the Cybertruck launch. And until the Cybertruck launch, I just don't see the stock price doing anything but sideways. Cybertruck launch is going to add 20, 30, 40 points to the stock price, I'm sure. And the rate at which the Cybertruck ramps is going to be very, very important. It won't come out in the dollars, in the earnings, but in terms of people's perception of the future, and particularly next year's revenue and margins, that's going to be very important. So rate of ramp and the early indications of the margin that they're able to earn on the Cybertruck, those are, I think, the critical aspects. I know you want to know next week's price. I can't give it to you.
And then I think, of course, that I'm going to be doing a report on this week. I think the next 90 days have so many uber catalysts. Potentially, we've got a potential AI day 3. We've got the high level.
That's a negative catalyst.
That's a negative catalyst. Unless the robot is out there doing.
That's a negative catalyst. Yeah. Look, all of the stuff that we cognoscenti, right, the Tesla cognoscenti, are so focused on, all of that is a negative impact on the market because they are so short-term focused. They're focused on next quarter's earnings and next year's forecast.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Everything we're talking about, the AI day, the investor day, the robot, all of that, even the semi and the new factory, and all of that is over their head. In fact, they regard that as, Elon's crazy ideas. And that's really that's our magic potent. That's magic for us, because it means that the market is undervaluing the stock very dramatically.
A lot, yes.
But next week, I know you. I mean, you'll fire me one of these days because
no, it's okay. It's all right. We have people out there. We have some other YouTubers and people on Twitter who think that individuals who trade in Tesla, on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis are somehow horrible people. I know that I trade sometimes. I don't trade like I used to, but I have traded. I've made the most money I've ever made on the stock market trading leaps in 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
And that was day trading. That was trading by the hour or by the minute. I'm not going to be doing that anymore. I'm just getting too old for that. But
and the market doesn't lend itself to that anymore.
It's not as cool as it was that particular year.
20 and 21 were amazing years. But you haven't mentioned the most important thing of the week.
Okay.
The superconductor.
Oh yeah. So I've got Brian lined up. I've got him on instant call. I've got him on the red phone. Okay. I mean, as soon as there's anything, what are you thinking about that?
Well, I was very skeptical and remain skeptical. So it's interesting that Cathie said that she mentioned that Brett Winton, who's their futurist, I think chief futurist, they call him, and he's a brilliant guy. And, he put the chances of it being true at about 10%, which was roughly where I put it. He says now the consensus is up to 40%.
On his
ARK is at 60%.
ARK is at 60, and there's a betting, what do you want to call it, website, the betting website that bets on everything. They're at 40%, and that's up from 30. And then ARK is now at 60. So I went back and I looked at a bunch of articles again last night. I tried everything that's on, by the way, nextbigfuture.com. You want to follow this on a minute by minute basis? Go to nextbigfuture.com. Brian Wang he's got at least 8 or 9 articles up there already, and it's really better than you get by Googling it. I found that his resource was better than Google in terms of up to the minute news. And what we're seeing is literally, I guess, Larry, I think they say possibly thousands of labs across the world right now are trying to replicate it. Thousands of labs, because it's something that can be done in a well outfitted high school or university lab, according to Brian. So these labs are to replicate it. Yeah.
I think what's more important than the replication of it is the computer simulations to try and understand it and to really refine it, to understand what is creating the phenomenon and understand it, and then try and they're already postulating better solutions along the lines. So much of this is serendipitous. You try this and you try that and you try, and even when you try that stuff, you try a particular approach, you don't know what is the tiny little difference that could actually improve it or could make it work. So being able to apply very significant compute to the molecular structure and to replicate or that molecular structure and to understand why superconducting is possible, what could be causing the superconducting, how it can be improved, and instead of this chance combination of material, improve the material to the degree that would promote superconductivity to a greater degree. I think this is the interesting part of it, and the amount of attention being paid to it, is probably going to be quite important to it. And the other thing is we should also, understand what can be improved by superconductivity. And the one thing I will say that I've heard a lot of talk about batteries. No, I do not believe superconducting is going to improve batteries for vehicles in the short term or even in the medium term.
But apparently it's incredibly good for capacitors, which is one of Elon's interest areas.
I'm still not
okay.
Nothing will influence me that supercapacitors would be a good solution for this. But I do think, though, that motors will be impacted significantly. I think it would lead to much lighter, much more efficient motors with, significantly improved, and generators could be improved very significantly, and that's on, on the production side, and a huge amount of material science is going to evolve from this, huge amount. So maybe, maybe it's not a superconductor, but maybe it's going to precipitate some enormous superconducting, advances. So we'll see. I mean,
one of the reports, I think it was on nextbigfuture.com, suggested that where the capacitor might come in would be that you would actually have a capacitor at your fuel intake.
Yeah.
On the car, and so that would allow the fuel intake to be instantaneous,
right?
And the capacitor would transfer it to the normal battery.
Yeah,
so that would be pretty phenomenal. I mean, that wouldn't certainly be the most important use case. If this thing happens, the use case.
It would be incredibly expensive, though. I mean,
I see.
It would take a lot of years of evolution before the cost came down to warrant the use of supercapacitance. For that is my first read on that. But Could be wrong.
So
The one thing Brian said that, Tesla will put 50 people on this immediately.
Yeah,
I think
that's my next question.
yeah, I think the last thing they do is put 50 people. If they're going to do this, they would put 5 to 10 people on it, which would be 50 times more productive than if they put 50 people on it.
Yes.
But that they would put 5 or 10 people on it, that would make a lot of sense, and it would sound like Elon. But I would love to get Elon's take on it, because he will surprise us all with his observations and what he understands about it, because I don't have the physics background that he has. None of us do.
Yeah.
And he would be able to give us a much better take on this. But yeah, it's fascinating.
No, I think the fact that he hasn't said anything, I think that is one of the most interesting stories of the year. The fact that he finally mentions it in a tweet the other day as an aside to another comment about how great X is. I'm sorry, in a post on X, as an aside only, not in any kind of detail. So at some point, I think Elon will be coming forward and making some kind of comment about this. And as you point out, it might even be something where he does an X. Have people already been talking about this? I realized the other day we now have SpaceX and X spaces.
Yeah, that's great. He loves X. He loves X. Right. By the way, there is a very large materials science group, very large, a compact material science group that is shared between SpaceX and Tesla.
Yes.
And that would be the obvious place for a lot of this to be done, because it's definitely that in SpaceX that superconducting could be very interesting. Now, there you have opportunities to use things like supercapacitors, for specific requirements, and also superconductors for specific requirements, because in spacecraft, weight is everything, and so superconductors at room temperature could be a massive advantage in several areas.
Of course, it goes without saying that particular group at Tesla / SpaceX is world class. Their materials science people are, they were some of the earliest top people that he was hiring, was the material science people. So that group now is, when you say world class too, it goes beyond their own brains. They have people a phone call away that are if they're not already on the team, they're a phone call away to the top people in the world. So yeah, I would be shocked if Tesla and or SpaceX don't end up with some kind of a big leadership position on this particular subject. Somebody said the other day that you never know how it's going to turn out in terms of the patents, in terms of who owns what. But this has got to be something that hopefully maybe the South Korean government would just give these guys $100 million each, and then turn it loose. Just make it open source. It's just.
Well, it is open source.
Oh, it is open source.
Yeah,
the use of it, or I know that the information is open source, but what about the use of it? There's a difference. Your patent is open as soon as you put your patent.
It's not patented.
It's not patented.
It's not patented, and no patents have been, to my knowledge. No patents have been. It's published. They've published
as a paper. Yeah,
it's published in the paper, and it's not patented. So, there are thousands of people who are working at replicating it right now.
Yeah.
And I promise you that if it actually does work, it will not be in the form that it currently is in that. Now, a lot of people may seek to patent their particular
version of it.
Version of it. It's possible. I think it's going to be very difficult to patent it. So I think that, the value to these guys is the potential of a Nobel Prize.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I think that's far more valuable than any patent would have been. But, these are academics. We'll see. I mean, what they do with it, who gets. But I mean, you can be sure that in China, there is an enormous amount of effort and money being put into this.
Well,
So,
I mean, you look at they already have had at least 2 reports out of China of attempts to replicate it. You've got the Berkeley, but you've got the Berkeley lab here who did the simulation or the computer analysis, and that was a pretty impressive response that they had, saying, yeah,
yes,
it makes sense. So,
well, what's more interesting is that they're seeking to improve it, or they see opportunities they think they've divined the reason for the superconductivity, and they see an opportunity to improve upon it based upon their molecular analysis.
Right.
Well, we'll see. I mean, this is the science that I don't particularly understand, and it's way above my head. So I can only opine on based upon experience with other, with similar situations.
Sure. Larry, as always, informative, useful, challenging. I need to be challenged. There needs to be somebody to cool my jets from time to time. And then I hope that I'm the guy that's warming your jets. Anyway, so if you like having Larry on, you know what to do, and then hit subscribe. Follow Larry. That'll be the way that you can show him some love. Follow him on Twitter at Tesla Larry. And then, and I'll put that information below in the descriptions. And then, you realize, of course, I'm giving away books right now. I just had this really good idea, Larry. I was thinking, I could go back and get my old book on recessions and not publish it again. I'm not going to put it up on Amazon, but I could give it away to people who join Patreon. Maybe people would like to see my many, many years old book on recessions.
I'm putting my hands up. I joined Patreon, so
okay, all right, okay. That's right. You joined Patreon.
I want my book.
And the day that you joined Patreon, it was my best day ever in terms of new members. So, thank you very much for that. All right,
Thanks,
it's been great. Thank you, everybody, for joining Patreon. And as always, it's been great talking to you.
Bye.